I am going to do a lesson where you will need, if you have more than one sheet of paper, that's probably what will be best for you, and just pencil. So you will need a couple pieces of paper, and just lined notebook paper is fine with that, and just something to write with today. So last week, I touched on the idea of closing, and when I taught some about close reading, I think that close reading really should just be called good reading, because it's what good readers do. And we're finding that all of our comprehension and vocabulary things that we're doing can fit into close reading. All sorts of different, and close reading is just a set of different comprehension type activities to do using the same text. So there's a surface level, there's a little further down level, and then there is the absolute bottom, which I'm going to review here in just a second with you. So today is another close reading lesson, and I love the text that I'm going to teach with today. I teach with it every single year, and in fact, I have developed some lessons or an entire close reading lesson around this text, because it is one that I really, really keep my fingers crossed and hope that it is true. Because I think out of a horrible tragedy that is mentioned in this book, that this situation, this story, is one that brings a little happiness to, if it really did happen. And a lot of people say, or some people say, that maybe have connections, directly to the text, that supposedly these events, or some events that are in this text, did in fact happen a little over 100 years ago. So we're going to read to find out what that was. But before we get started, I'm going to show again my poster. And these are found, I have a whole set of these posters along with an individual poster for each one of these reads with an apple on it too. This is my close readings like an apple, because I say the first level, I call them peel questions. These are ones that are on the outside of the apple. They're important. They hold the apple together, but they're really just kind of on the surface. It's important comprehension activities that you need to be able to do, your basics, things that we talk about over and over in these lessons. Your second read, this doesn't mean that you're going to read the book 3 times over. No, you might go back and read a page in the second read or in the third read, or a couple pages, but you're not going to go back and read the entire book 3 times. So that's something that boys and girls can get a little confused about. It's just reading a section over more than once, which is what good readers do. So the second are our pulp questions. That's like the middle part of the apple, the meat of the apple, if you want to think of an apple having meat, even though it's a vegetarian item. But the pulp is where the food of the apple, the main part of the food, is located. And so that's kind of the getting down to the looking at things a little bit deeper in my close read. And then the third read has the core. And the core holds the apple together, but it's also where the seeds are. And the seeds are planted for the future. They give you ideas for the next time that you read something, or to connect to another piece of reading or something happening in our world today, or in the past that you know of. So the text I'm going to use today to teach is it is by Marty Crisp and illustrated by Robert Papp. And it's called Titanic At. And it's called Titanic At because we can assume that it may have something to do, if we take the ending off, and I can tell by my picture on the front, that it probably has something to do with the ship Titanic that so many boys and girls are still fascinated with today. People love reading about the Titanic disaster, not because we want to learn or we want to hear about a very, very sad thing that happened in our world's history, but because we're interested in kind of how it played out and what we can do to prevent it, something like that in the future. So I now am going to start reading, and then we will do our first activity with it. So I see Titanic At by Marty Crisp, illustrated by Robert Papp. And then I open it up, and we have something called a preface or a preface, but it's technically, it looks like preface, but it's pronounced preface. And that is not really part of the book, or it's not part of the actual information in the story or the text. This is a little background information. So it kind of sets the tone for the reading and helps boys and girls and adults too be interested in what it is that we're going to read about. All right, so it says, Titanic was a ship as big as her name. She was 10 stories high and 4 blocks long, a floating city with her own restaurant, post office, library, swimming pool, squash courts, that's like something kind of similar to tennis, gymnasium, and even a Turkish bath. So that's like a kind of sauna. The new ship carried some of the world's richest people, as well as poor immigrants from Ireland, Sweden, Norway, Croatia, Bulgaria, Portugal, and Syria, among its 2,228 passengers and crew. Because she was built with watertight compartments in her hull, people thought Titanic was unsinkable. But the huge ocean liner hit an iceberg as she steamed across the North Atlantic on her maiden voyage. It means the first time she said. It was a moonless night, April 15th, 1912, when the ship sank, taking with her some 1,500 people, a fortune in cargo, at least 9 dogs, and just possibly a cat. As far as history was concerned, Titanic's cat, because every ship that sailed in those days had a cat on board, could be counted among the dead. For 80 years, the true fate of the cat was just another of Titanic's unsolved mysteries, resting with the resting hulk on the ocean floor. Then, in 1985, explorer Robert Ballard discovered the long-lost wreck, and new information began surfacing, like this story. So, whenever we read, and this last line here, like this story, ... that means that there's more there, and I've told you how to use that, like if you're quoting something directly in text, but you don't want to write the entire quotation out. This, boys and girls, is something called foreshadowing. And to foreshadow means it gives a very large, kind of overwhelming prediction about what it is that we're going to read in the future. So I am now going to do my first part of my close read. So I've only read 2 pages. And I've looked at the title, but I can still brainstorm and get an idea before I read to help me. So we are going to look at some predictions that we can make about the book based on what we've read. So this is an example of a level 1 peel activity. Okay, and I'm gonna have to tilt this around so it doesn't shine. It's kind of rainy out, and I have my light on there. There we go. So I'm going to try to come up with at least 3 predictions. Now, I have read this book over and over and over many times now, but I'm going to pretend like I've never read this book before. And chances are you haven't either. You've not heard the book Titanic At before. So I'm going to look at my front cover again, and I'm going to think about what I just read in the preface of the story. So what clues are given to help us foreshadow what the text could be about? Well, I think this could be the story this book could tell how the cat may not have died on the Titanic. So that's definitely one possibility. And I can get some information there. It says, for 80 years, the true fate of the cat was just another of Titanic's unsolved mysteries, resting with the rusting hulk on the ocean floor. So people assumed that the cat died, but maybe the cat didn't die. Maybe this book is about that. So what else could this be about? Well, maybe it could be the cat maybe saved somebody in the text. That's a possibility, right? Maybe the cat did die, but maybe it saved somebody else. Okay, so maybe the cat saved someone somehow on the Titanic. And you might say, well, how did the cat do that? Well, the cat could have known something was wrong and was trying to get someone's attention. That's a possibility. And then we could say, let's try to come up with one more. Well, maybe the cat, if we can assume, all of our predictions probably need to have something to do with the Titanic and the cat. So maybe the cat didn't die. Maybe the cat saved someone, or maybe the cat wasn't on the Titanic. I don't know. The cat did not even get on board, because it's possible that, it says that they assumed that there was a cat on board, but it's possible maybe the cat didn't get on board. Okay. So here is my level 1 peel for this book. I've made some predictions based on my large foreshadow here to tell me that there could be some interesting information that comes out of this book that someone maybe didn't know before reading this. All right. So now I'm going to read the rest of the text to you, and then we're going to, at the end, go back and do our pulp question and our core question together. Every time Jim glanced to the side, there was the cat, flashing her tip of her tortoiseshell tail at him all the way to the shipyard. Some claimed a tortoiseshell cat could see the future. Jim himself believed only that cats were lucky. His da worked in the Belfast, Ireland shipyard, so Jim knew all the lore about ships and their cats. Jim reached the ship, rocking in its slit, towering above him. Its fresh black and white paint seemed to glow in the morning sun. Jim felt lucky to be crewing this beauty on her first voyage. It was his first voyage, too. Jim's eyes started with the 4 tall smokestacks, studying every detail as his gaze slowly traveled down to the dock. The same cat was sitting there on top of the piling. She jumped down and came towards Jim as if she'd been waiting for him all along. It was a good omen, which means a good sign, for a cat to walk towards you. Jim was certain that this was going to be a great trip. He held out his hand. His da said Jim had a way with animals. The cat rubbed against his knees and he tickled her soft fur. Then the cat turned and disappeared into the open hatch on the side of the ship. A man in a blue uniform came up behind Jim. "Did you see our cat?" "Aye, I did, sir." Jim nodded at the ship. "She just went inside." "Are you here to crew for the trials, lad?" "I'm signed on as a cabin boy, sir. My name's Jim Mulholland. I'll be going all the way to America." Jim couldn't keep the excitement out of his voice. "Welcome aboard." The man smiled and shook Jim's hand. "I'm Chief Steward Latimer, and from this moment on, you're in charge of that fool cat." "Aye, aye, sir. I'll find old 401 as soon as I stow my gear." It was a long-standing superstition not to call a ship by her name when it was being built. That could be unlucky. Every ship under construction had a number. This ship was 401, and the cat would be called likewise. So, it seems that we hear luck a lot in this. It seems like that Jim is a very superstitious person. There were a lot of places to look for a cat on the ship 4 city blocks long. Jim searched from the compass platform on the boat deck to the boiler rooms at the bottom of the ship. The smell of fresh varnish was strong in the third-class general room, but no cat. Jim's whistle echoed back to him under the glass dome of the grand staircase, but no cat. Jim sighed with relief when he finally found the tortoiseshell on B deck in Café Parisian. Then he saw a kitten beside her. "So you have a family. It's a fine job you've done, little 401. Jim knelt and stroked each fluffy kitten. 4 new ship's cats in all. This voyage would be very lucky indeed. Jim kept the little cat family in a box the next day as he polished chairs on A deck. The sharp tang of sea air made him daydream about the great voyage to come. He had always wanted to go to sea and see faraway places. First, there would be 2 weeks of fitting out and sprucing up. Then the launch and the ship's trials would begin. Jim worked hard keeping the cat family close at hand. Once the ship got moving, he noticed that 401 would slip in and out of the box, putting an end to mice scurrying through the galleys. She caught a rat in an oatmeal bin Jim had forgotten to cover in the third-class storage cupboard. It was lucky she was around, he suspected, to keep him from getting into trouble. She's a master huntress. Jim filled the water tanks above the porcelain sinks in each third-class stateroom. "Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling," he sang as he worked. The kittens frisked to the lilt of the Irish lullaby, and the cat seemed to study Jim as he sang. Jim was on the boat deck, swabbing it clean with a mop, when he spotted one tiny bold kitten venturing out in the box and ducking under a lifeboat. There was no railing where the lifeboats hung. What if the kitten fell overboard? Jim squatted by the lifeboat and used his mop to pull the kitten back to safety. 401 watched it all with her mysterious green eyes. She began licking her baby clean as soon as Jim put it in the box, as if nothing had happened at all. But Jim always heard the rumble of her purr now, whenever he came close. So he was surprised when he stood at the rail 2 days later, watching the ship dock in Southampton. The cat was not at her usual spot beside him. Her kittens were sleeping down below in a box under his bunk, as they'd done during the 8 days of practicing stops and turns and night running. "Have you seen 401? Jim asked the porters and the deckhands. No one had, and passengers were starting to come aboard. "Have you seen 401? He asked Mr. Latimer. The chief steward only shook his head, too busy to answer. Jim leaned forward in surprise. Could that be his cat going down the gangplank carrying a kitten in her mouth? Jim shaded his eyes. It was her. She placed her kitten in a coil of rope on the dock and started back into the ship. He could hear her loud mewing even from here. A mewing cat meant a difficult journey. Jim knew the old sailor superstition as well as he knew his Dawes Irish lullabies. He clutched the rail as she reappeared with a second kitten. First-class women in silks and furs and third-class men in rough brown wools streamed onto the ship. Jim pushed through the crowd, hurrying down to its berth. Even here, far below deck, he could smell salt water and fish. was getting close to cast-off time, but the ship couldn't start her maiden voyage without her ship's cat. Jim found only one kitten. It was the one he'd rescued from under the lifeboat. He picked it up and cradled it. Surely 401 would come back. As he stroked the kitten's fur, he could hear people calling, "Bon voyage! Send me a postcard!" The call of "all ashores going ashore" startled Jim. He looked down at the kitten cupped in his hands. There was really no other choice. Jim bounded up the stairs and raced across the deck. "You're going to miss the boat, boy," a crewman called. The gangplank was already being hauled in. Jim clutched the kitten and jumped. So he jumped off the Titanic, didn't he? An ear-splitting blast from the ship's whistle told Jim the ship was on its way. It was sailing with his duffel bag and all his gear still aboard. He wouldn't be crossing the Atlantic after all. He wouldn't be seeing America. "I think you forgot someone," Jim muttered, glowering down at 401. "I hope you're happy. Now look what you've made me do." The cat looked up at him, unblinking. "Well, the Titanic's one ship that doesn't need a full ship's cat for luck. She's unsinkable. Finest ship ever built." The cat didn't glance up as tugboats pulled the Titanic into the Southampton harbor. She was busy licking her kittens. So if Jim's not on board, what's that mean? He missed the boat. So, book could tell how the cat may not have died on the Titanic. The cat might have saved someone on the Titanic. And the cat did not even sail on the Titanic. So all three of my big predictions ended up true. 6 days later, Jim was hard at work delivering packages so he could rent a room for himself and the little cat family. The cat was his friend despite what she'd done. He'd taken care of 401 and her kittens on board Titanic, and he'd keep taking care of them until they could find another ship. A smaller, older, less exciting ship, to be sure. Jim was so busy delivering bread and milk, newspapers, and dry goods parcels that he missed the first whispers of trouble. But the whispers soon turned into cries. Jim waited with the crowd in Canute Street outside the White Star offices. Grim men in suits came out and said the Titanic had hit an iceberg. They posted the survivors' names. The kitten slept in a warm lump in the canvas bag Jim had slung over his shoulder. The cat followed close on his heels as he threaded his way through the throng to get a closer look at the list tacked to the door of the White Star Line. One sheet said saved. It was the shortest. The other said missing. Jim's eyes scanned the long columns. His name was there. So they assumed Jim was on board because he was on the registry to set sail. Jim scooped up the cat and looked into her bottomless green eyes. "You gave me your luck," Jim whispered, "and I thank you." The cat blinked and went back to licking her whiskers. There was really nothing else to say. I love the illustrations by Robert Papin's book too. They're like, it's almost like the sun is shining on them. So now is the author's note. So here is what could be actually true in this text before I go to my next two activities I'm going to do with this. It says, with the 1997 publication of the memoir of Titanic stewardess, which means she was a staff member on board, Violet Jessup, historians learned that the ship's cat had given birth to a litter of 4 kittens before the Titanic was launched and was on board with those kittens in the early spring of 1912. So that is true. The cat was a little female. She had 4 kittens before they set sail. We know that. This report was followed by an article, so a newspaper article, in the Belfast Irish News by reporter Anne Hales. So after that book came out, a reporter in Ireland wrote a story. She interviewed 92-year-old Paddy Scott, who had himself once been a reporter. So this Anne then interviewed a 92-year-old man named Patty Scott, who used to be a reporter himself. He said in the 1930s, who claimed that he had crewed Titanic's trials and was assigned the care of the ship's cat. So the reporter talked to an elderly former reporter who said in the 1930s, he did a story and knew firsthand of a man who was a young boy and who was on the crew. He was in charge of the ship's cat. When the cat got off in Southampton, taking her kittens with her, the superstitious young sailor followed. So, this book is a fictional account of what that elderly reporter says he learned firsthand may have really happened. Maybe the cat didn't go down with the ship. It sounds like she didn't. And she might have actually saved a cabin boy by getting off too. Hopefully it is true. Don't you hope? I do. So now I have my book next to me for my next level of reading. And I am going to go to my level 2. My level 2 are my pulp questions, the ones that are a little bit deeper, the kind of the meat, the vegetarian meat of the text, if you will. Okay, so what I'm going to look at here is I've not really talked at all about in any of my lessons narration. And there are 3 kinds of narrators. Usually you focus more on 2 of them. So there is first person. And a first person narration uses I or me. The narrator is in the text. And then there is third person. And third person narration is the narrator is like watching the story unfold, and he or she, whatever you want to think about it, whichever gender you want to think, he or she is telling the story. So you are going to find words like he or she in it, where you're talking about the main character. Now, could you find the words he or she in first person narration? Absolutely. But if you're talking about the main character using he or she, that's third person. So Titanic At, you might already be saying, oh, I know what this is. I know what this is. It is third person narration. So the narrator is watching the events unfold. So how did we make our decision? Well, I can say the narrator in Titanic At, and I'm going to underline Titanic At there because it is the name of a book that we are handwriting. The narrator in Titanic At is telling the story without being involved. So he or she is watching it and is giving details about what's happening in the text. So that's my level 2. This level 2 was an easy one. What kind of narration is this? A little bit deeper if we're actually looking at the words that are on the page. We see the words Jim. We see he over and over. We even see for the cat, we see she. So it's not being told from the cat's point of view. That would have been an interesting take on this if if the story was told from the cat's point of view, wouldn't it? In first-person narration. That would be going even further beyond the text here. Okay, so then the last one I'm going to look at is my level 3. And that is going to be my core questions. Going far beyond or getting your brain thinking about how it relates to other texts. So we read the author's note at the end. And what I'm going to ask is, what is your opinion on this text? So I'm going to write down what my opinion of this text is. I know we've talked about opinion writing, forming good, valid opinions with text evidence. So what do we think? Do we believe that this is a true story? Well, I'm going to say, I believe Titanic At is based on truth. So there's my answer. I said if I'm writing a good race question, which I should have written that up here. The very first sentence, I just have to restate an answer. That really tells me what, my answer is. I believe Titanic At is based on truth. Maybe you didn't, and you would have to support it that way. So now I am going to do my cite evidence and explaining portions. And that is really the main part of my short answer paragraph here. So I believe Titanic At is based on truth. The author's note, and I do have to capitalize that because it's the name of an actual part of this text, the author's note. The author's note says, there's some citing evidence, a retired reporter, because it said a 92-year-old at the time, former reporter, so it's a retired reporter, interviewed a man who was, and I'm going to put saved in quotation marks, because he was superstitious. He saw the cat getting off. Maybe he was saving a kitten. In this book, Titanic At, they made it that he was, but probably not. The man said in reality, he saw the cat getting off. He was very superstitious, which he knew that he thought the cats could see the future in old Irish folklore. So he said, oh, cat's getting off the ship. Something bad is about to happen. So I'm going to get off too. So the author's note says a retired reporter interviewed a man who was saved when he followed the cat off the boat. Now, I'm going to explain by saying and state my opinion even more so here. I want this to be true, and let me tell you why. So here is a further explanation. This is what the author's note says, citing my evidence. But now I'm going to explain it a little further and give more of my opinion. I want to believe this is true because it is a happy story from a very sad event. Titanic disaster is one of the worst sea disasters our world has ever seen because so many people died. And things could have been done differently to save more people. And for some reason, they didn't. Happy story from a very sad event. So now I'm going to end this. Now, I could end my race question with a restate of the main idea. This is why I believe Titanic At is based on truth. Or, since I have written so much of my opinion, I could continue with another opinion sentence. Or, I could also, I always tell boys and girls, I could make a text to self or text to text or text to world connection to this. Show that I understand and comprehend it even more. That right there is core. How can I connect to this event myself? Well, I myself have a cat. Do I think that she can tell the future? Maybe, maybe not. But I could say I don't believe. I do not believe my cat can tell the future. So that is opinion, but it's also a connection because I have a cat, just like 401 was in this text. So I'm going to reread it, make sure that I have stated my opinion and I've supported it with valid evidence, because an opinion just has to be valid and supported. And then have I ended it well? I believe Titanic At is based on truth. Okay, my restate and answer. The author's note says a retired reporter. Oh, that says reported. I need report her. Another reason to go back and reread. You catch little mistakes like that, don't you? Something like that could be a point off on a reading test. The author's note says a retired reporter interviewed a man who was saved when he followed the cat off the boat. I want to believe this because it is a happy story from a very sad event. I do not believe my cat can tell the future. So maybe I wish my cat Carrie could, but I don't think she can. So that's what I have today. We're going to look again at close reading tomorrow. And I hope that you have learned a little bit more about how you can do easily 3 comprehension activities on a text to show that you can understand it on the surface level, kind of a little bit deeper, and all the way to in the middle to extend it to something else. So I will see you tomorrow. 2 little poodles. Goodbye.